There are crashes we have only read about, told through faded photos and fragments of memory. And then, there are the ones we saw. The ones that unfolded in real time, in front of rolling cameras, where smoke, fire, and silence were all captured forever. A camera does not panic. It does not look away. It simply records. Through its unblinking eye, the world has witnessed aviation's darkest moments. From air shows that turned to chaos in front of cheering crowds, to cargo planes falling from the sky in perfect daylight, these recordings remind us how quickly the calm skies can turn against us. Every clip you will see in this documentary is real. Every voice, every final second is a record of what happens when skill meets nature and human limits meet the power of flight. It was June the 24th, 1994. A clear day over Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington State. Crews were preparing for an upcoming air show. Among them was a B-52 Stratofortress, a massive bomber, 80 feet tall, wings wider than a football field, and carrying 4 engines powerful enough to shake the ground. Inside, Colonel Arthur "Bud" Holland sat in the left seat. He was known as one of the most experienced pilots on base, a man who had flown thousands of hours on the B-52. He was also known for something else, flying too close to the edge. On that afternoon, the base's video team recorded what was supposed to be a simple rehearsal. The plan was to perform a demonstration flight for the upcoming open house event. The B-52 would make a low pass, circle the airfield, and show off its maneuverability to the crowd. But as the bomber turned toward the base tower, cameras caught something no one expected, a move that broke every rule in the manual. Colonel Holland banked the B-52 into an incredibly steep left turn, nearly 70 degrees, far beyond the aircraft's safe limits. The bomber's massive wings flexed under the strain. Inside the cockpit, co-pilot Mark McGeehan and the crew voiced concern, but it was too late. The aircraft began to stall. At less than 300 feet above the ground, there was no room to recover. The B-52 rolled past 90 degrees. Its left wingtip struck the ground, and in an instant, a fireball engulfed the field. All 4 crew members were killed on impact. What made this tragedy even more shocking was that it had been predicted. Fellow pilots and superiors had warned about Holland's dangerous flying for years. There were previous incidents, low passes, steep turns, even close calls during training missions, but none had resulted in disciplinary action. The official investigation later revealed that a culture of deference, known as the authority gradient, had played a fatal role. No one wanted to challenge a senior pilot, even when the risks were obvious. The crash footage was shown during the investigation, and what it captured was devastating. The entire maneuver lasted less than 15 seconds from start to fireball. In those seconds, the B-52's reputation for strength and endurance meant nothing. Even a machine built to carry nuclear weapons could not survive a single moment of human overconfidence. The U.S. Air Force completely restructured its approach to flight demonstrations after the accident. Strict limitations were placed on airshow maneuvers, and new crew resource management training was enforced across all squadrons. Every pilot was reminded that experience does not replace judgment, and that rank does not silence responsibility. Today, that same footage is used in aviation training around the world. It serves as a haunting reminder that discipline, not daring, keeps aircraft in the sky. The camera that day didn't just record a crash, it recorded a lesson that changed military aviation forever. It was May the 5th, 2013, a bright afternoon over Madrid, Spain. The Cuatro Vientos airfield was alive with the sound of engines and applause. Families had gathered for a celebration of aviation history. Vintage aircraft from past decades, lovingly restored, were taking turns performing low passes, turns, and flyovers. Among them was a classic symbol of post-war flight, a Hispano HA-200 Saeta, a small Spanish-built jet trainer from the 1952nd, known for its elegant lines and distinctive silver sheen in the sun. In the cockpit sat retired Spanish Air Force pilot Ladislao Tejedor Romero. He was no ordinary performer, a veteran aviator, test pilot, and technical advisor to the Ministry of Defense. For him, the Saeta was not just a machine. It was history brought to life. The crowd cheered as the old jet roared down the runway and began its display, banking gracefully, showing that even decades after its design, the Sayeta could still cut the air with purpose. But cameras that day would capture something far more tragic than nostalgia. As the aircraft began its final pass, witnesses noticed a sudden drop in speed. The jet appeared to climb too steeply, then roll slightly as if fighting for lift. At just a few hundred feet, the nose dropped sharply. In seconds, the Hispano HA-200 struck the ground near the airfield boundary, bursting into flames just meters from parked cars and spectators. Every second of the crash was recorded by the event's official video team, by journalists, and by members of the crowd. The footage showed how fast a display can turn from graceful to catastrophic. Fire crews reached the wreckage within moments, but the flames were too intense. The pilot was pulled from the wreckage alive, but critically injured. He was airlifted to hospital, where he later passed away. The investigation by Spain's Civil Aviation Accident and Incident Investigation Commission later revealed a tragic chain of technical and human factors. The aircraft had taken off with minimal thrust margin and warm, thin air conditions, a scenario that drastically reduces engine performance and climb capability. The report noted that the HA-200's weight and balance were near the upper limits, and as the pilot attempted a steep climb-out, the aircraft's airspeed dropped below safe stall threshold. Once the stall began, there was simply not enough altitude to recover. Investigators emphasize that even experienced pilots can be caught by the physics of older aircraft, which lack the thrust, stability systems, and aerodynamic warnings of modern jets. Unlike today's trainers or aerobatic planes, vintage aircraft demand constant attention to speed, pitch, and energy. One small deviation and lift disappears in an instant. The Cuatro Vientos tragedy also reignited debate over the safety of air shows featuring historic aircraft. Spain's aviation authorities reviewed procedures for maintenance oversight, flight clearances, and crowd distances, ensuring that future demonstrations of vintage planes would include stricter performance limits. But beyond the official reports, what made this accident resonate around the world was the footage. Dozens of cameras captured the jet's final seconds, the low hum of the engine, the brief stall, the impact, and the silence that followed. The internet amplified the moment, turning it into one of the most viewed airshow incidents of the decade. For those who watched it live, it was a reminder that even beauty in flight comes with weight and consequence. The Hispano Sayeta had been built to train pilots in an era before automation, an age when skill and instinct alone kept a plane in the air. On that day, as the jet met the ground, it became clear how fragile that balance remains, even in the hands of the most experienced. Today, Cuatro Vientos continues to host air displays, but under renewed safety standards and with greater awareness of risk. The crash of the Sayeta stands as both a tribute and a warning. A tribute to the pioneers who flew these machines, and a warning that in aviation, every climb must be measured, every margin respected. It was the 29th of April, 2013, at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. The day began like countless others. At this vast military base, cargo jets landing and departing, the sound of engines echoing across the mountains. National Airlines Flight 102, a Boeing 747-400 BCF freighter, was scheduled to depart for Dubai with a routine load of heavy military vehicles. On board were 7 experienced American crew members, 5 pilots, a mechanic, and a loadmaster. All of them had completed missions in and out of war zones before. The aircraft, tail number N949CA, had been loaded with 5 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, massive armored trucks weighing nearly 70 tons in total. Each vehicle had been chained and secured inside the cargo bay, a process that seemed routine to the ground crew. At 3:30 p.m., the 747 lined up on runway 3. The air was thin, the temperature high, and the jet heavy with cargo. Cameras on the base perimeter captured what happened next. As the plane accelerated down the runway, everything appeared normal. The 4 Pratt & Whitney engines roared to full power. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the air, and then within seconds something went catastrophically wrong. The nose of the 747 pitched upward, far beyond a normal climb angle. For a few terrifying moments, the giant freighter seemed to hang motionless in the sky. Then the wings wobbled, the engines strained, and the aircraft began to stall. From the ground, soldiers and bystanders watched in disbelief. One person's dashboard camera recorded the entire event footage that would later circle the world. The enormous plane climbed sharply, rolled slightly left, and then plunged almost vertically back toward the ground. It struck the surface near the end of the runway, exploding into a massive fireball that sent a black plume of smoke hundreds of feet into the air. All 7 crew members were killed instantly. The investigation that followed, conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, uncovered the hidden danger of improperly restrained cargo. When the aircraft rotated for takeoff, one or more of the heavy MRAP vehicles broke free from their restraints and rolled violently toward the tail. That sudden rearward shift of weight sent the aircraft's center of gravity far beyond safe limits. The 747's elevators became ineffective. Its nose lifted uncontrollably. And even with full forward pressure on the control column, the pilots could not recover. Inside the cockpit, the flight crew had only seconds to understand what was happening. The voice recorder captured a calm but desperate attempt to lower the nose, followed by the realization that the plane was no longer responding. There was no fire, no engine failure, no weather hazard, just physics. Once the center of gravity moved aft, the aircraft's fate was sealed. Investigators later found deep gouges and torn floor beams in the cargo hold, physical proof of the MRAP vehicle's violent movement during takeoff. The NTSB determined that the cargo had been improperly secured with restraints rated below the required tensile strength. The loading company had also failed to provide complete documentation for tie-down procedures. The tragedy of Flight 102 became a global wake-up call for the cargo industry. Airlines and regulators worldwide reviewed their load-securing standards, mandating new inspection protocols and specialized training for ground personnel handling oversized freight. Boeing and cargo operators worked together to improve restraint equipment, and the FAA introduced new oversight rules for non-scheduled charter flights carrying military cargo. The footage of the crash, recorded unintentionally by a passing driver, remains one of the most haunting images in modern aviation. It shows how quickly a routine departure, less than 20 seconds after takeoff, can descend into disaster when one link in the safety chain breaks. For the families of the 7 crew members, the video was unbearable evidence, yet also a testament to their final professionalism. They fought the aircraft to the end, following every procedure even as gravity pulled them down. The lesson of National Airlines Flight 102 endures. In aviation, every bolt, every strap, every calculation of balance matters. Airplanes don't just fly on engines, they fly on discipline, precision, and respect for weight. And when that balance is lost, even the largest aircraft in the world becomes powerless against the laws of motion. It was July the 27th, 2002, a warm summer afternoon in Lviv, Ukraine. Families gathered at the Sknyliv Air Base to celebrate the anniversary of the Ukrainian Air Force. More than 10,000 people filled the field, children sitting on their parents' shoulders, veterans saluting the roaring jets, and cameras everywhere, ready to capture what was supposed to be a proud national moment. On the runway stood the pride of the Ukrainian Air Force, a Sukhoi Su-27 flanker, painted in blue and gray, sleek, powerful, one of the most capable fighter aircraft of its era. At the controls were 2 of Ukraine's most skilled pilots, Colonel Volodymyr Topinar and co-pilot Yuri Yegorov. Both were highly decorated, trained to handle the extreme maneuvers that made the Su-27 famous. The flight that day was meant to be the highlight of the show, a low-altitude display of loops, turns, and rolls close enough for the crowd to feel the thunder of its engines. As the cameras rolled, the Su-27 accelerated down the runway and lifted off gracefully. For the first few minutes, everything went as planned. The aircraft climbed into a high turn, banking elegantly, leaving trails of vapor in the clear sky. Spectators cheered as the jet began a slow roll, followed by a dive, a maneuver meant to showcase its precision. But within seconds, the rhythm changed. Video footage from multiple angles shows the jet descending too fast and too close to the crowd. The aircraft's nose dropped, and the angle of attack increased sharply. At that altitude, there was no margin for error. The Su-27 clipped the tops of several trees, lost control, and began a slow, horrifying roll toward the ground. In the final seconds, the jet's left wing struck the tarmac, and the massive aircraft careened into the spectators. A deafening explosion followed, a ball of flame engulfing the runway area as thousands ran in panic. 77 people were killed instantly, including 19 children. More than 500 others were injured, many severely. The pilots ejected at the last moment and survived, but were immediately detained by authorities on the field. The scene that followed was chaos, smoke, debris, and the sound of sirens echoing through the airfield that just moments before had been filled with applause. The investigation that followed revealed a cascade of fatal mistakes. The flight path had not been properly cleared of spectators. The crowd had been positioned far too close to the active display area, in some cases less than 100 meters from the flight line. Even more troubling, the pilots had been given an outdated airshow map, one that did not accurately reflect the obstacles and spectator layout. During the performance, they attempted a complex split-S maneuver that required much more altitude than they had. By the time they realized how low they were, physics left them no chance to recover. But the inquiry did not stop with the cockpit. Ukrainian officials concluded that the organizers themselves shared responsibility for the disaster. Poor planning, inadequate risk assessment, and a culture of performance over safety had set the stage long before the jet ever left the ground. The pilots were convicted of negligence and received prison sentences, though both maintained that they had followed orders and had been misinformed about their flight area. The Sknyliv tragedy became the deadliest airshow accident in history. The footage, filmed by dozens of bystanders, spread quickly across the world. For the first time, people could see every second of a military jet losing control and striking a crowd. The impact of those images went far beyond Ukraine. Airshow safety standards were rewritten globally. In Europe, display zones were restructured to ensure that aircraft never pointed their flight paths toward spectators. In the United States and NATO countries, airshow approvals began requiring detailed risk management plans, minimum distances, and oversight by independent safety officers. The term display safety bubble became mandatory vocabulary in every aviation event manual. For survivors and witnesses, the sound of that explosion never faded. Many of them described how the air turned silent afterward, as if even the wind was stunned by what had happened. The tragedy forced not only Ukraine, but the entire aviation world to ask a painful question. Had the thrill of performance outweighed the value of human life? Today, 2 decades later, every pilot who performs at an airshow has trained under rules shaped by Sknyliv. Every line painted on the ground, every restricted area marked for spectators carries the weight of that day. The footage remains archived, a haunting record of what happens when precision meets risk without protection. It was supposed to be a celebration of flight. Instead, it became a moment when the sky itself fell on those who came to admire it. 77 lives. One lesson that no display, no maneuver, and no crowd is worth a single second of unnecessary danger. It was July the 24th, 1993, at Fairchild Air Base in Gloucestershire, England. The Royal International Air Tattoo, known simply as RIAT, was in full swing. It was one of the world's most prestigious air shows, a gathering of elite military display teams and aircraft from across the globe. Tens of thousands of spectators filled the grass fields, binoculars and cameras in hand, waiting for the next high-speed flypast. That afternoon, the crowd's attention turned to the horizon as a pair of swing-wing bombers approached from the distance 2 Royal Australian Air Force F-111Cs. Sleek, fast, and known by their nickname, Aardvark, the F-111 was designed for terrain-hugging flight, able to skim just above the ground at supersonic speed. The plan for this demonstration was daring, but well-rehearsed. A synchronized, low-altitude pass over the runway, one aircraft crossing over the other in a dramatic climb. As the announcer's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, the 2 phone 111 seconds approached from opposite directions. Cameras rolled, spectators cheered, and then, in the blink of an eye, something went wrong. The flight paths converged too closely. The upper F-111 dove slightly earlier than planned, and the lower aircraft began its climb a fraction too soon. From the ground, it looked like an inevitable collision. The 2 bombers crossed within just a few meters of each other, the jet wash shaking both aircraft violently. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the massive wings seemed to slice the air within arm's reach. For a terrifying second, the announcer fell silent. But somehow, miraculously, both jets emerged intact. The upper F-111 rolled away to the left. The lower jet continued straight and leveled off, smoke trails marking the razor-thin gap that separated disaster from survival. What most spectators didn't realize was how close the pilots had come to catastrophe. Analysis of the flight footage later estimated that the two aircraft missed each other by less than 20 feet, a single heartbeat from collision. The pilots' reactions in those final moments were textbook. Precise, instinctive corrections that kept the jets from meeting midair. When the maneuver ended, the crowd erupted in applause, unaware of just how dangerous that moment had been. But inside the cockpits, both crews knew it wasn't triumph. It was luck, skill, and split-second timing. The lead pilot later admitted in interviews that the closing speed and alignment had been tighter than planned, likely due to wind and timing drift during the setup turns. The Royal Air Force and Australian Air Force immediately reviewed the incident. The display was halted for the day, and officials analyzed the flight profiles and timing cues. It was concluded that minor miscalculations, combined with atmospheric distortion, had nearly turned a precision pass into a fatal accident. While no one was hurt, the near miss triggered a wave of reforms for RIAT and other major air shows. From that year forward, new rules were introduced. Minimum separation distances between aircraft during crossing maneuvers were increased, real-time telemetry checks became mandatory, and display formations were rehearsed with enhanced ground oversight. Pilots began to use laser-assisted alignment systems and simulator rehearsals to guarantee positional safety before every public flight. The 1993 RIAT incident has since become a case study in airshow risk management, a reminder that even perfection on paper can falter under real conditions. It was proof that the difference between brilliance and tragedy in aviation can be measured in inches and milliseconds. Every airshow pilot today, standing on a flight line before takeoff, hears echoes of that moment. They know that the sky, while vast, leaves no margin for complacency. The crowd at Fairford that summer saw one of the most breathtaking displays of a generation, but for the pilots inside those 2,111 seconds, it was a day when professionalism and reflex alone kept history from writing another disaster. No flames, no casualties, just the closest possible brush with fate, and a lesson that even the best trained crews must always respect the invisible boundary between spectacle and survival. 150 seconds, sleek and elegant, once the pride of the Royal Air Force. At the controls was Andy Hill, a former RAF pilot and experienced display performer. His routine had been approved and practiced, designed to showcase the agility of the old hunter with loops, passes, and graceful turns over the airfield. At first, everything seemed routine. The hunter thundered down the runway and climbed into the clear summer sky. The sound of its single Rolls-Royce Avon engine echoed across the field as it began a wide turn to set up for its next maneuver, a looping figure that would bring the jet low over the runway before climbing once more. But as the aircraft arced upward and began to descend through the loop, spectators noticed something was wrong. The jet wasn't gaining altitude fast enough. The angle was too steep, the airspeed too low. In a horrifying instant, the aircraft continued its downward path, unable to recover. It passed just over the airfield's fence and slammed into the A27 motorway, a busy road full of weekend traffic. The explosion was massive, engulfing cars in flames and sending a fireball into the air as debris scattered across the tarmac. Silence followed for several seconds, then chaos. The crowd gasped, some screaming, others frozen in disbelief. Black smoke billowed into the sky where just moments before, a vintage jet had looped gracefully. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but the scale of destruction was immediate and devastating. 11 people on the ground were killed, drivers and passengers caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. 16 more were injured. Amazingly, the pilot survived. He was pulled from the wreckage alive, but critically injured. The investigation that followed would become one of the most detailed in UK aviation history. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, found that the aircraft had entered the maneuver at too low an altitude and at a speed insufficient to complete the loop safely. When the jet reached the top of its climb, it had lost too much energy, leaving no space to recover. The investigation also revealed a troubling pattern of oversight failures. The display routine had been approved without sufficient altitude margins, and the safety risk assessments for the event were outdated. The pilot, investigators noted, may have miscalculated his entry parameters or misjudged the Hunter's performance compared to newer jets he had flown in the past. The Shoreham disaster sent shockwaves through the airshow community. It was the deadliest airshow accident in the United Kingdom since Farnborough 1952. In response, the Civil Aviation Authority, CAA, immediately suspended all vintage jet aerobatic displays and initiated a full review of airshow safety protocols. Within months, new regulations were introduced. Vintage jets could no longer perform high-risk maneuvers over populated areas. Organizers were required to extend exclusion zones, increase risk assessments, and implement stricter emergency response plans. Pilots had to undergo enhanced evaluation of their display routines, including computer-simulated checks to verify altitude and speed safety envelopes. The trial that followed drew national attention. The pilot, after a lengthy investigation and legal process, was acquitted of manslaughter due to insufficient evidence of intent or recklessness. However, the summer of 2002 was one of the deadliest fire seasons in American history, not just for the forests that burned, but for the crews fighting from above. In a single tragic year, 2 firefighting air tankers disintegrated in midair within weeks of each other. Both caught on amateur video, both shocking the public and reshaping aerial firefighting forever. The first, a Lockheed C-130, a Hercules, operated by Hawkins & Powers Aviation, was battling a wildfire near Walker, California on June 17. The aircraft had been converted from a military transport to a firefighting tanker decades earlier, carrying thousands of gallons of retardant in its belly. As it made a low pass over the flames, witnesses filmed what seemed at first like a textbook drop until something unthinkable happened. The wings suddenly folded upward and separated from the fuselage. In seconds, the massive plane broke apart, crashing in a fireball. All 3 crew members aboard were killed instantly. Just a month later, on July 18, another tragedy struck. A PB-4Y-2 privateer, a World War II-era patrol bomber also converted for firefighting, was performing a retardant drop near Estes Park, Colorado. Eyewitnesses described the same horrifying sequence. The aircraft leveled for its drop, released its load, and then its left wing detached mid-air. The tanker rolled and plunged into the hillside below, killing both pilots. The footage of these accidents spread quickly across news networks. Viewers were horrified to see aircraft symbols of heroism and rescue literally come apart in the sky. It wasn't pilot error, weather, or fire turbulence that brought them down. It was fatigue, decades-old metal that had flown far beyond its intended lifespan. Investigations by the National Transportation Safety Board and the U.S. Forest Service uncovered extensive structural fatigue in both aircraft. The C-130A had failed along the wing spar structure, the metal beam that holds the wings to the fuselage. Years of stress from low-altitude, high-G firefighting maneuvers had quietly weakened the metal until it could no longer bear the load. The PB-4Y-2 showed similar fatigue cracks and corrosion hidden beneath layers of paint and inspection panels. These weren't isolated problems. Most of the nation's firefighting fleet at that time consisted of vintage bombers and transports retired from military service decades earlier. They were never designed to endure the extreme forces of repeated low-level drops in mountainous terrain. The 2002 accidents revealed that the system had been relying on aircraft that were, quite literally, flying on borrowed time. In the aftermath, the U.S. government grounded all large air tankers pending safety reviews. Dozens of aircraft were permanently retired, and the Forest Service terminated contracts with private operators using aging platforms. The search for a safer future began one that would lead to the introduction of modern, purpose-built firefighting aircraft like the BAE-146 and the Canadair CL-415. For the firefighting community, the losses were personal. The pilots who fly air tankers are a special breed, skilled, fearless, and devoted to protecting others. The crashes of 2002 became a somber reminder that even heroes need safe tools to do their work. Today, when modern air tankers roar across the sky, dropping their bright red fire retardant, they do so under new regulations born from those tragedies. Each drop, each mission, carries the memory of the men who gave their lives when their aircraft and the system around them failed. It was February the 4th, 2015, a cold, cloudy morning in Taipei, Taiwan. Commuters filled the highways that ran beneath the approach path of Songshan Airport, unaware that above them, a turboprop airliner was preparing for takeoff on what should have been a short and uneventful domestic flight. TransAsia Airways Flight 235, an ATR 72-600, was bound for Kinmen Island with 58 people on board, 53 passengers and 5 crew members. At 10:51 a.m., the aircraft began its takeoff roll from runway 10. The two Pratt & Whitney PW127M engines roared as the Dash 8 accelerated down the wet runway, lifting smoothly into the gray sky. Everything seemed normal until 37 seconds after liftoff. Without warning, a master warning light illuminated in the cockpit. The right engine, engine number 2, had experienced a sudden loss of thrust due to a malfunction in the fuel control unit. The system automatically triggered a flameout warning. But amid the alarms and confusion, the captain made a fateful mistake. Instead of shutting down the failing right engine, he reduced power and then shut down the left engine, the one that was still functioning properly. From that moment, Flight 235 was flying with no effective power. The aircraft began to lose altitude as the stall warnings screamed, "Mayday! Mayday! Engine flameout!" The captain transmitted, his voice urgent but still composed. Seconds later, the co-pilot called, "Feather shutoff, number 1!" trying to follow the checklist, unaware that the healthy engine had just been disabled. As the Dash 8 descended, the flight data showed repeated attempts to restart the engines, but it was too late. The airspeed had dropped dangerously low, and the stall horn blared continuously. Cockpit audio captured the chaos of an irretrievable situation, confusion, disbelief, and desperate attempts to regain control. Below, dash cams across the city recorded what would become one of the most widely seen aviation videos in history. The ATR appeared suddenly in the frame, banked sharply left, its left wing dipping almost vertically. The tip of the wing clipped a passing taxi and the guardrail of a bridge before the aircraft slammed into the Keelung River. The impact broke the fuselage apart, scattering debris across the water as horrified onlookers rushed to help. Rescuers arrived within minutes. Astonishingly, 15 people survived, many pulled from the river by locals in small boats. 43 others, including both pilots, lost their lives. The footage of that final moment, a plane banking over the city, barely clearing rooftops before striking the bridge, became a haunting symbol of how fragile the line is between flight and fall. The Aviation Safety Council of Taiwan conducted a meticulous investigation. They found that the initial right engine malfunction was manageable. The aircraft could have continued the climb safely with one engine at reduced power. However, the captain's decision to shut down the working engine turned an emergency into a catastrophe. Human factors analysis revealed that the captain had limited recent experience on the ATR 72-600 model and had failed a simulator proficiency check just months earlier. Under stress, he misinterpreted the alarms and acted on instinct rather than following standard engine-out procedures. The co-pilot, junior and hesitant, did not challenge the decision forcefully, a breakdown in cockpit resource management that compounded the error. As a result, new training protocols were mandated worldwide for ATR operators. The manufacturer revised engine failure procedures and cockpit warning designs to make engine identification clearer under pressure. TransAsia Airways itself grounded its remaining ATR fleet for inspections and later ceased operations altogether. The story of Flight 235 stands as one of the clearest examples of how automation, stress, and human instinct can collide. It was not a mechanical failure that doomed the aircraft, but a sequence of human reactions, seconds of confusion, that erased any chance of recovery. The image of that plane, wings tilted over the Taipei skyline, remains burned into aviation memory, a moment where training, trust, and time ran out all at once. Flight 235's legacy is both tragic and instructive. Even in the age of advanced avionics, the human mind remains the final safeguard in the sky. And when clarity gives way to panic, the result is not just mechanical, it's human. For nearly half a century, the Reno Air Races had been a celebration of speed, engineering, and raw human skill, a festival where legendary warbirds, restored from the era of World War II, tore across the desert sky at breathtaking speeds. It was aviation's version of Formula One, low-level racing, high risk, and even higher adrenaline. But on September the 16th, 2011, the roar of engines was replaced by silence. As one of those warbirds, a North American P-51D Mustang called the Galloping Ghost dove into history for all the wrong reasons. The pilot, 74-year-old Jimmy Leeward, was a veteran aviator and film stunt pilot. His P-51, originally built in 1944, had been heavily modified for racing. The wings were shortened, the canopy redesigned, and the engine pushed to its limits. It was one of the fastest piston-powered aircraft on Earth. That day, Leeward was competing in the unlimited class, flying at more than 400 miles per hour just 50 feet above the ground, a razor-thin margin between triumph and tragedy. As he pulled up into a tight turn around one of the pylons, something went catastrophically wrong. Spectators' cameras captured the moment. The Mustang suddenly pitched upward at an extreme angle, almost vertical, before rolling over and diving nose first toward the crowd stands. In less than 2 seconds, the aircraft slammed into the tarmac near the grandstands, sending debris into the seating area. The impact killed the pilot and 10 spectators, injuring more than 60 others. The investigation that followed revealed a mechanical failure that no one could have foreseen. A critical trim tab on the left elevator, a small movable surface that stabilizes pitch, had broken loose due to metal fatigue. When it failed, the aircraft experienced an instant, violent pitch-up force that overloaded the pilot's body with more than 17 Gs. Leeward was likely rendered unconscious almost immediately, unable to regain control. Further analysis uncovered how years of racing modifications had gradually pushed the P-51 beyond its original design limits. Engineers had drilled holes, changed control linkages, and stripped away safety margins to shave off drag and weight. In a competition where fractions of a second mattered, every adjustment had a cost. Over time, those compromises invisible to the eye became deadly. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the failure was caused by a combination of structural stress, age-related fatigue, and excessive aerodynamic loading during high G turns. In other words, the aircraft had been pushed too hard, too long. In the aftermath, the Reno Air Races faced intense scrutiny. Safety barriers were expanded, course layouts changed, and inspection standards tightened. But for the aviation community, the tragedy struck deeper than regulations. It questioned whether speed, nostalgia, and spectacle could ever truly coexist safely in the modern era. For survivors and witnesses, the images of that day are impossible to forget: the silver flash of a legendary machine, the sound of engines turning to silence, the shock of seeing history's greatest flying icon become a weapon of chaos in an instant. Yet from that silence came change. New safety oversight, modern telemetry systems, and a commitment to never let history repeat itself. Every chapter in this story, every flight, every recording, every frame of video reminds us that aviation's greatest achievements are written side by side with its greatest lessons. From Fairchild's overconfident turn to Bagram's falling 747, from Taipei's river to Reno's runway, the cameras didn't just capture tragedy, they captured truth. The lesson is universal. Even the most powerful machines are fragile when respect is lost. Every second of footage, every wreckage investigation, every reform that followed proves one thing: that progress in aviation is paid for in vigilance. And so, when the engines roar again, when the wings rise into the sun, they do so carrying not just dreams of flight, but memories of the ones who fell and the lessons that keep the rest of us safe.